Hey yo guys, what's up and welcome back to Toe Tags Metal Reviews. And today we're getting our first impressions of the new album from Iravu, Concrete Age and Frozen Crown. So this is a bit of a unique video for us because we're covering two very obscure bands, which we don't normally do here, and an album that's not even out yet. We're lucky enough to get early access to Call of the North by Frozen Crown. It comes out in March, I think March 10th.
March 10th, so you're getting our thoughts 2 months early.
Yeah, we've actually had the access to the album for about a month now too, and haven't listened to it yet. Today was our first time listening to it because we wanted to do a first impressions for you guys. But I think we should kick it off with Iravu. That was the first thing I started my day with. Okay. Again, this is an album, a band that I've never heard of before, but I saw them in the new release list, and we saw them when we picked them out. So check them out. So A Fate Worse Than Home is the name of the album. This is a one-man project from Malaysia, which is pretty cool. For me, it sounded a lot like old school Norwegian black metal, but with a really a sense of atmosphere added to it, like a really prominent sense of atmosphere. It's like Transylvanian Hunger or The Mysterious Dom Santanas by Mayhem, those kind of old school black metal albums I'm talking about, but without that rawness to them. It's a lot cleaner production wise.
Yeah.
It was pretty good. I didn't hate it, but it's not quite my cup of tea, especially when it comes to black metal. There was a couple standout tracks. Fear and Lead, which is track number 4. It's a pretty long song, almost 9 minutes long. By the way, this is a 34-minute album and it's only 5 tracks.
Yeah,
so
5 tracks.
Yeah, but about halfway through the Fear and Lead, or Fear and Lead, I think it's Lead, there's a breakdown section that reminds me a lot of the drum pattern from one breakdown section, the double bass.
Oh,
it's very similar to that, but the riff over top of it is very different, and actually quite appealing. So that sounded pretty good. The other song that stood out to me was track number 5, the last track. And for some reason, it just stood out to me. It gets really thrashy on this song, so it kind of changes up the pace and the feel of the music by adding some thrash elements in there. So that was pretty good too. But overall, pretty good. Didn't love it, but it was okay.
Yeah, the only thing I really had going into this album was that, okay, it's a black metal album. That's the only thing I really had to go by. So I'm thinking, okay, this might be like older school black metal. It might, it might. But I was surprised that it started with like this shoegazer ambiance. And I'm like, oh, okay, like that's the direction we're going. And the majority of the album is kind of that. You've got old school black metal with all this atmosphere, all this background, which I think is honestly quite fitting of the theming it feels with this album. You look at this album art, and it's this astronaut floating in space with a cracked helmet. Like, it kind of gives you that feeling. I feel like the sound of the album is pretty accurate to what what is being presented there. And I think that's actually pretty cool.
That feeling is you're fucked.
Yeah, like, you're out there and that's it. But I do like that it's kind of just like a really nice kind of soundscape when you're putting this kind of black metal and these blast beats and stuff on top of a nice background. I just don't know if I would recommend it to most people, Like if someone said, oh, I need some metal right now. I'm like, well, do I recommend this? Yeah. I don't know, because it's really unconventional, but I do think if you like old school black metal, you'll probably still enjoy this. And if you want some just some energy to vibe with, this is a good album to listen to for that. And I liked it for that. Like, it's an album I would probably put on if that's, what I wanted to go with, right?
I agree with that. Yeah, recommending it's hard, but it's also worth checking out anything. So it's like, the recommendation is always going to come from us, regardless if we really loved it or not.
I do agree, by the way, about Fear and Lead. Like, I made a note about that song that it comes out of nowhere with this cool groove just right out the gate. So, that one stood out because of that. But honestly, these tracks, 5 songs, and still 34 minutes, which is quite short for an album. Yeah. It kind of just flew by.
Yeah.
You just get caught up in the vibes.
Second band, Concrete Age. Bardo Thodol, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It's Tibetan. The title is Tibetan. It translates to Liberation in the Immediate State Through Hearing, which is
interesting considering that's 2 words to say that much.
I know. Well, it's from a Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Ooh,
and it's about when people die, they read this book, and it's supposed to guide them into the afterlife, right? So it's like a ritualistic sermon, I guess, for the dead to guide them. Even though another band we've never heard of before, they were on the new releases list. We picked this band out of, there's like what, 8 or 9, 7, 8, something like that bands.
Yeah.
These are the two we picked. This band, this album I found very interesting. It has a very global sound, and by that I mean these guys sound very culture infused. I don't know what the word is. They're influenced a lot by culture, different cultures from around the world. Listening to this, there's stuff here that has, you know, Indian music, there's East Asian music, there's Hungarian music, there's Bulgarian music, all these elements that are all intertwined into this, but it doesn't sound like it's all over the place. It's a nice, neat package with even considering that blend of styles. I would compare it to Thy Catafalque is probably the most known band that, if I'm going to compare it to anybody, Thy Catafalque is easily the #1 band that this can be associated with. I actually like this a lot. I have a lot of songs that I thought were standout tracks. I'm not going to go through every note I have on every one of them, but song number 1, Hex, number 2, Purity, number 4, Threads of Fate, number 5, I think it's called 3T Puti, or 3T, I don't know how to pronounce it. I read it earlier but forgot to write it down. But this is an instrumental song, and it's basically a Bulgarian dance. It's Bulgarian dance music, and it's just like a 2-minute interlude that's instrumental, but it's just cool that they have that in there. The title track is catchy, and the 9th track, Thunderland, is also really good. I just felt like there was a lot going for this album, and I was just pretty impressed going through it, because a lot of these unknown bands, you listen to them and they almost always sound run-of-the-mill. This, I didn't think was run-of-the-mill at all. I felt this was very unique. Other thing to note, this is a apparently Russian band based out of London, England. They just have a lot of interesting things going for them. A lot of interesting things.
There is a lot going on with this album, and I think it's cool that they have so many different cultural music that goes into their creation, right?
Yeah.
There were a few tracks that stood out to me, and that kind of goes to show how, like, you made a good point that bands like this can sound run-of-the-mill, but this one does have something that really kind of sets it apart. And I think that's a mix of really cool riffs and the fact that they pulled from so many different cultures, like, to reference. And one interesting thing I noticed is that it kind of starts out straightforward, and as the album goes, it gets more and more cultural. And by the end, you're thinking, wow, this is like way different than what I was expecting. And I think that's pretty cool. But you know, this is one of those albums where I write notes. It's usually about a riff that was good. It's one of those kinds of albums. For example, Ridges of Suffering. That's a rad one. The last track, I forgot the name. Also really good riffs in that one. There's a song, True Believer. You probably won't know, you probably haven't heard it, but the initial riff reminds me of Jay Lethal's theme song. He's a wrestler who's with AEW right now. I hear that beginning of True Believer and I start singing Jay Lethal's theme on it. Like, this just fits right in. That song is still really good. Threads of Fate is really good. Like, there's just really good riffs, and I feel like it's one of those riff-heavy albums, but what makes it interesting is that they got all this different stuff on top of that, so it compounds into something quite unique.
Yeah, again, I was pretty impressed by it, so I'm probably going to give it some more listens when I get a chance for sure. Third album of the day, last but not least, Call of the North by Frozen Crown. So, we reacted to their title track a week or so ago. When was that? A couple weeks ago?
It was not too, it was like a week or two.
Yeah. Both enjoyed it, really good. Great vocal performance, great guitar solo. They had this acoustic section in it that, you know, stands out and breaks up the pace. I felt the same way listening to it here. Basically, if you want my thoughts on that title track, watch our reaction.
I'm in the same boat.
I felt very similar. Good stuff.
That solo is still fire.
Before I continue, one thing I gotta mention here. So, like I mentioned, we got this album early, so it's not like on Spotify, but I got the songs on my Spotify, but for some reason, for me, my tracks were all out of order, and I didn't know. So, because they're not numbered, right? So I listened into the album today, and I thought they were in order, and then we talked about it just before we started recording this video, and we're like, my tracks are not the same as your tracks. So we looked it up, and yeah, his are fine.
Yeah, mine was in proper order.
Mine were completely out of order. So my impression of the album, there's a couple things that stained my impression of the album because of this, and I'll just get this out of the way right now. Track number 4 and track number 9 are both like what we call cool down songs, which are basically songs that either are slow and soft through the whole thing, or they start off slow and soft and then build up at the end. But for me, those were tracks 8 and 9. They were back to back together right near the end of the album, and I thought that was very bad choice to put those together on the album, and it was putting a sour taste in my mouth. Now that I know that they don't go, they're basically on opposite ends of the album, makes me feel a lot better about it. So I do gotta listen to the album in proper order to really get the proper feel. But with that said, I liked a lot of the stuff that was going on here. Blackheart, which was my number 1 track, my first track, but it's actually track number 3. Really crunchy riff, man. This starts off with this crunchy riff that I don't typically hear in this band. It's something in the guitar tuning or
a nice tone
effect pedal they have going on. I immediately got a sense of freshness from that song. Like, yes, they still sound like Frozen Crown, but they're still experimenting, which is what I always want from bands. Sound like you do, but try something new. Oh, I just made that up. That's kind of a cool phrase. Fire in the Sky, another song with a great riff. The opening riff reminds me of BYOB. For me, this was track number 6, but it's actually track number 2, which coincidentally is BYOB is track number 2 on Mesmerized. So, Now or Never, another great song. Vocally, this song hit me better than some of the other songs. Jade really hit some really nice, high, pure sounding notes. The guitar solo in this song is gnarly. I'm saying a lot, sorry, but if you like Frozen Crown, you're gonna get good Frozen Crown with this album, right? Did I like it as much as Winterbane on my first listen? I'm not quite sure. I really liked Winterbane. I think Winterbane's a top tier album.
It was on your top 5, wasn't it?
Of that year? Might have been. Maybe an HM or maybe
I think it was number 5.
Might have been. It was a toe tag album for me for sure. Either way, does this album quite hit that mark? That's yet to be seen. I'm not quite sure yet because I've only heard it one time. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I thought the album was pretty good, and one of the main things I kind of noticed is that there are, at least from my first listen, 0 harsh vocals on this album. And this band is not known to be a harsh vocals band, but they do sprinkle it in here and there. It was there on Winterbane.
Yeah.
Not at all on this record. Not to say that it's gotten softer or anything, because it definitely hasn't, especially with songs like Blackheart, which has an amazing guitar tone in it. You already brought it up. And like, as soon as that song started, I said, whoa, what pedals are they using? Because that guitar tone is great. So, you know, it still has the edge. It's just an interesting creative decision to not include any harshes at all. Like I said, the title track solo section is still great. Fire in the Sky, with its energy, reminded me a lot of Unleash the Archers, which does make sense. It's also a female-fronted power metal band.
Yep.
It would make sense for them to sound similar. I think you even mentioned them in our reaction to the title track too. Like it makes sense to have that comparison. I thought that the quiets, like from listening to it again, the quiet section of the title track was a little bit longer than I wish it could have been. But the song right after has a similar thing, but it happens earlier and it is shorter. So it kind of gets to the action, you know, a lot sooner. I don't know if you got this vibe at all, but when Victorious kicks in, like after the soft intro, it really sounds like Dragon Force.
Yeah, well, it's got that typical power metal,
but but I don't know. When I heard that, I'm like the first thing that popped in my head was Dragon Force, and that didn't happen for any other song. It was just that specific one with that specific.
That's
moment.
that's not even Dragon Force. That's just standard power metal, like Groove 101.
I guess
pretty much.
I don't know. So there was this rhythm in the start of the second verse of In a Moment, which is syncopated, which I was not expecting. It's hard to recall exactly. In a Moment.
Okay.
And it's hard to recall exactly what it does. I've only heard the song one time.
Yeah.
But it was just an interesting kind of like mix-up as to what you would have expected from, I think it was like a triple meter. It might have been in like 6/8 or something. Like I said, I've only heard the song once, so it's hard to recall specifically, but it was just an interesting thing where I thought, oh, that's a cool thing. Okay, neat. Like, I like that they're like, what if we just play around with this just for this part of the second verse?
Yeah.
So I like that. I like that a lot. And that's the kind of thing you do to create standout moments on albums.
Right.
You just throw the expectations under a bus.
Yep.
You know, and just totally like, you really thought we were going to go here. Let's go there instead.
Well, what did you think of the outro track, Far Away? Because I felt like that song was quite progressive. I feel like it goes a few different directions and kind of deviates from standard structure.
It does.
So that's kind of more in line with what you're talking about too.
It makes sense for it to be the last track as this kind of epic. I feel like the last track does a good job at capping off the album. I think, you know, they did a good job with that. It's similar to the last record. I believe the last track on Winterbane was like a 10-minute song, if I recall correctly. So they kind of went, you know, obviously let's have the last track be like this big giant thing. I believe the last one on this record is like 7 or so minutes. One of the longer tracks, if not the longest. And it accomplishes a similar job. Like it does what it needs to do and does it properly. And it does kind of throw you for a bit of a loop by going in a few different places before reaching a quiet part near the end and then bringing it home. So they did what they needed to do.
Yeah, anyways, guys, this is just our first impressions. As you know, we're going to, obviously, Frozen Crown, Call of the North is the album we're going to review this week. And we'll be back, you know, in a week to give you guys our full and final review of the album. But be sure to check out the other 2 albums, guys. There's definitely something to take home for anybody. Depends what you're interested in, but check them out for sure. And when Call of the North drops, you'll be able to check that out as well. But be sure to come back for our review. That's it for this video, guys. Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. I'm Vile Self.
I'm TV Fish.
We'll see you guys on the next one. Keep those heads banging.